measles outbreak that started in West Texas has exploded with more than 600 confirmed cases across 22 states and now 2 deaths, both unvaccinated children who had been living in Texas. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made a trip this week to the Lone Star State to attend the funeral service for the most recent victim of the outbreak.
He capped the trip with a post on X in which he advocated for the MMR vaccine, calling it, quote, the most effective way to prevent the spread of measles, an apparent 180 for the secretary who has previously questioned the safety and downplayed the efficacy of the MMR vaccine. Hours later, however, Kennedy made a second post on X, saying he met with 2 doctors who he called extraordinary healers and said they had used an aerosolized steroid and an antibiotic to treat measles. It's important to note, one of those doctors has been disciplined by the Texas Medical Board for quote-unquote inappropriate treatment of patients with intravenous antibiotics and other medications, unquote. Pediatric Dr. Alastair McAlpine hit back at the treatments being recommended by Kennedy, saying measles is a virus and doesn't respond to antibiotics. He wrote on X, for the head of HHS to be messaging this in the middle of an outbreak that has killed 2 children is despicable. Neither of the medications are medically accepted treatment for measles.
Well, that's fair enough, but doctors sometimes have some discretion to try and experiment prescribing different things to find out if that might help treat that disease. I mean, that's how we use medications in some cases that we already are tested and know to be safe and try different applications with them. I remember, for instance, with COVID, I mean, set aside the ivermectin and all that stuff. I remember that some doctors trying to treat it with azithromycin, which is an antibiotic. And I remember I asked someone who, because what do I know? I asked someone who's a medical journalist. Well, that makes no sense to me because it's a virus and it's antibiotics are for bacteria, I thought. And the person said, well, sometimes you try it out anyway because you can have. Well, so I don't see why there needs to be thunderous condemnation of just trying a safe drug in a different application. Seems silly to me.
The larger issue is, as I certainly was hoping, I think a lot of people were, that Bobby would be a kind of bridge between some of the more straight up, pharmaceutically based traditional medical models and some questions and some ideas that are not crazy, that are not illegitimate, but instead it just seems to have deepened the divide. One thing
I think he's trying to do that, right?
I think he's trying. I do. I don't know what the backstory is. I don't know. But I do know this. We must take infectious diseases in children very, very seriously. Yeah. And I had not thought that the MMR was going to be any question. Measles, mumps, and rubella, I thought that question was settled many decades ago. So I certainly understand why people are upset at children.
But he's advocating for it, and I don't even know. People can tell me if he's been he was very against that vaccine. I thought he has said consistently that I vaccinated all of my children, that his children were up to date on the vaccine schedule. He had questions about whether it should be required and questions about the COVID vaccine and its efficacy. Now, I certainly don't agree with everything he said about COVID or even the COVID vaccine. I think some of the harms ascribed to the COVID vaccine by skeptics of vaccination have been overstated. However, I have to point out that the benefits of it were also overstated early on when everyone, including in the government and the top people, said it was going to prevent you from getting COVID, which it clearly does not.
The COVID vaccine, to me, is a very different conversation from the MMR.
Right.
And I think we need to keep them very, very separate.
I agree. And in fact, throwing them all in the same bucket has undermined compliance with the MMR vaccine.
Absolutely.
That's just not my crazy lunatic perspective. That's what Deborah Birx said that on Piers Morgan's show a couple weeks ago. She said the way we sold the COVID vaccine was really bad because it is eroded.
Well, that's what I said earlier, that suppress information. This creates distrust. What I'd like to know is of the parents who did not give these children who died, who did not give them the vaccine, I just wonder why. Was it because they had this idea that it didn't work, or was it difficult for them to get access to it? I'd like to know what the story was there.
Yeah, instead of just screaming at Kennedy about this, how can our public health officials reckon with their own failure to the backlash against the vaccine policy that they were selling during the pandemic that has very unfortunately undermined confidence in the vaccines, because I think
read
it's very
an article the other
unfortunate
day.
indeed.
Some of the people who have resigned at HHS have complained that Bobby was not open to a real conversation about what the science was. I think that I don't know. Once again, I think what's important is that that bridge be built, and I hope that whether he has been or not, I hope that Robert Kennedy will find his way to be a real bridge.
Well,
so that we
you
can have
accuse
this
him of a lot of
more
things. I think one thing you
expanded
can't accuse him of is being unwilling to have an open conversation. He, unlike I think anyone else in the cabinet or anyone else running for president, he appeared on this show, Rising, multiple times for long stretches of time to be grilled by me and other hosts on this subject and other subjects. He made himself more available. You did as well, obviously, when you were running as a Democratic candidate, which we were very grateful for. But Kennedy, unlike many other people who sought some power to shape health policy in this country, wanted to discuss his attitudes and his views with different perspectives, which I think is a healthy tendency, even though I certainly don't agree with everything he's said or expressed, or every policy even he has on health, because I want to make drugs. You know, he's much more of a pro-regulation person than I am, for instance, because I want to speed up the process of approving. I think there can be too much, red tape in there too. But we want things to be safe, obviously, and we don't want protectionism for the pharmaceutical industry. That's where I think all of us can agree.
The bigger problem for me, and yes, and I think that all people at the table should have a chance to be heard. And that's my hope for Robert Kennedy, is that he's really listening to everyone. We don't really know right now. There's a lot we can't tell what's happening in the background. But I think the larger conversation about health is, no matter what is happening over there, we will not be a healthier nation if we continue to destroy all environmental regulations. You hate regulations, but a lot of those environmental regulations are safety regulations. We cannot continue to just have all of this drilling and not expect the toxins that are produced in the air to have deleterious effects on our health. Right now, the Trump administration is gutting women's health services, so much of the medical research. So no matter what Bobby does at HHS, we will not be a healthier country if we continue to gut these agencies, including, they are even gutting the agencies that have to do with keeping our food safe. Here is Bobby trying to get rid of all of the carcinogens in our food, trying to get rid of the chemicals and pesticides that we absolutely know cause cancer, and at the same time over here, Trump is getting rid of agencies that actually have to do with checking on the health of our food supply. So,
you need an environmental action report to build anything in this country. It's pointless.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about safety regulations.
That's the kind of thing I want to get rid of. But the backers of that will say that's for safety.
You just pivoted.
They will say, if you're trying to get rid of this,
safety regulations.
They will accuse you of undermining safety. You're against safety. You're against the environment. If you think this need to compile an environmental action report that no one will ever read, that's about this many pages, that is just going to stop the process of building anything, postpone it for years. People can weaponize this system to stop development.
Either side, but Robby, there's a complementary relationship to be had here. It doesn't always have to be adversarial. This point is good, that there's too much and it's burdensome and people can't even build a house. And then there's points here which are very, very important, which has to do with, if you completely desecrate, if you completely destroy the Environmental Protection Agency, then people will get sicker because of the terrible damage that is done to the environment by all of this drilling and all of these environmental practices. If you have some factory that's going to be spewing all these toxins into the river, into the air, of course it should not be allowed. People will get sick. Look at all the cancer produced by all the PFAS and so forth. These things are statistically proven.
We need to have, I am not for getting rid of all environmental regulations or having no environmental protection. I just think that protecting the environment is one goal, as is being able to build things and have economic development and have energy. And it must be one concern among many, and we must weigh all those things equally. And
economic freedom is important, but the government should broker economic freedom with concern for the common good, and that means the health of people, particularly in poorer neighborhoods where all of these sacrifice zones are, because they build all these awful factories that are spewing all this stuff in the neighborhoods of poor people who can't fight back, and they know it. That's what's going on, guys.
Next up, a pro-Israel group is asking Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate YouTube star Ms. Rachel. We'll tell you about it. More Rising right after this.